a waitress in a snow-buried cafe, her hands trembling over chipped porcelain cups, and a billionaire widow, draped in white fur, her silver chain gleaming like frozen fire. Between them stood a German shepherd, breath misting in the Boston cold, eyes fixed on something neither woman could see, yet both could feel. No one understood why the dog kept returning to that cafe door, or why the chain around the widow's neck mirrored the one found in a fallen firefighter's ashes 15 years ago. But when the truth surfaced, written in smoke, sealed in sacrifice, it wasn't tragedy they found. It was grace. What follows is a story of faith reborn from fire, of a daughter discovering her father's voice in the whispers of snow, and of a God who sends miracles not in angels, but in people, and sometimes in loyal dogs. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you believe some flames never die, hit subscribe, and let's walk through this story together. Snow fell in soft sheets over Boston, muting the city's heartbeat into a quiet hum. The wind carried the scent of roasted chestnuts and exhaust fumes through narrow streets lined with red brick and history. In the corner of Tremont Street, a small cafe called Maple and Steam glowed like a lantern against the frozen dusk, a refuge for the lonely, the weary, and those trying to remember how to feel warm again. Inside, Lila Dawson stood behind the counter, her slender fingers wrapped around a steaming mug as she poured another round of coffee. At 26, she carried an air of quiet resilience, the kind born from loss too early and dreams postponed too long. Her brown hair was tied loosely, a few strands falling over her freckled cheeks. Her gray eyes, though young, held the heaviness of someone who'd learned to live with absence, the absence of laughter, of answers, of a father who'd walked into a fire 15 years ago and never come back. Around her neck hung a thin silver chain, dull with age, the metal etched with a small flame curling around the letter D. She wore it like armor, a fragile thread of connection to the man she still called Dad in her prayers. Whenever her mind drifted, her hand would unconsciously touch the pendant, tracing its grooves, as though hoping to summon his voice from memory. The cafe's bell jingled, and a gust of icy air swept in. Heads turned. A woman stepped through the doorway, tall, graceful, dressed in a long white fur coat that shimmered under the amber lights. Snow dusted her shoulders like scattered diamonds. She removed her gloves with practiced poise, revealing fingers adorned with subtle rings, the kind of jewelry that whispered old money rather than screamed it. This was Eleanor Whitmore, the kind of woman newspapers called the phantom widow of Boston's empire. Her husband, Richard Whitmore, had been one of the city's wealthiest real estate magnates before his mysterious death a decade ago. Since then, she lived in quiet seclusion, her fortune intact, her emotions buried. Her beauty had aged like marble, untouched yet cold, sculpted by time and tragedy. By her side trotted a German shepherd named Duke, a magnificent creature of about 7 years old, his coat thick and black with a faint saddle of gold across his back. His amber eyes were intelligent, alert, and somehow human in their sorrow. When he moved, It was with the disciplined grace of a soldier, not a pet. He'd once belonged to Richard, and after the man's death, Duke had become Eleanor's shadow, the last living tie to a life she'd never truly let go. Eleanor approached the counter, her heels clicking like small declarations of distance. "Latte, no sugar," she said softly. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, the kind that could silence a room without raising itself. Lila nodded, sliding the cup beneath the espresso machine. But when she turned to hand it over, the light from the pendant around Eleanor's neck caught her eye. For a split second, time stilled. The silver chain, the same etching, a flame encircling the letter D. Lila's fingers froze mid-air, trembling slightly. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice breaking through the hum of soft jazz. "Your necklace, it looks exactly like one my father used to wear." Eleanor blinked, her expression unreadable. For a moment, her lips parted as if to speak, but instead she studied Lila in silence, her blue eyes sharp, yet oddly searching. Duke stepped forward, tail swaying, sniffing Lila's wrist with gentle curiosity. The touch startled her, a sudden warmth against the cold ache of memory. Eleanor finally spoke, her tone distant, like someone remembering a dream she wished she could forget. "Perhaps it's just coincidence," she said, though her fingers instinctively brushed the pendant, as if protecting it. But Lila couldn't let it go. That symbol wasn't random. It was carved by hand. Her father had told her so once, long ago, when she'd asked what it meant. "The flame means hope," he'd said, tucking the chain into his uniform. "And the D, it means Dawson. It means family." Now that same design rested against the chest of a woman who had never known her father, who lived in a world of glass towers and chauffeurs. The thought made her dizzy. She forced a polite smile. "Maybe," she said, though her heartbeat said otherwise. As Eleanor turned to leave, Duke looked back at Lila, just for a moment, and something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition. It was absurd, impossible even, but it hit her like a whisper. "He knows me." Outside, the wind howled down Tremont Street, carrying snowflakes like scattered ashes. Eleanor's figure vanished into the storm, Duke's shape trailing close behind, loyal as a ghost. Lila stood by the window long after they'd gone, the pendant in her hand growing warm against her palm. She didn't know why, not yet, but something deep within her had shifted. That night, as she walked home beneath the frozen glow of streetlights, the world seemed both smaller and larger. Some truths, she realized, don't stay buried forever. Sometimes they return, disguised as strangers in fur coats and dogs with knowing eyes. And as the snow thickened around her boots, Lila Dawson whispered into the cold, "Dad, what are you trying to tell me?" That night, sleep refused to come. Boston's winter winds howled outside Lila's window, rattling the glass like ghostly knuckles. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her fingers clutching the silver chain on her neck. The same emblem, a flame wrapped around the letter D, glimmered faintly under the streetlight. Her father's voice echoed in memory, soft but steady. Fire takes everything, Lila, but it also shows who you really are. He'd said it the night before the accident, before the alarms, before the smoke swallowed the world she knew. Now that same symbol had appeared on a stranger, on Eleanor Whitmore, whose husband had died in the very fire that claimed her father. Coincidence, or something far deeper? The next morning, maple and steam smelled of cinnamon and old jazz. Lila arrived an hour early, pretending to clean tables, while her heart thudded with anticipation. Every creak of the door made her glance up. At precisely 9, the bell chimed. Snow fluttered in with Duke, bounding in first, his breath forming mist. Behind him, Eleanor stepped inside, her fur coat dusted white, her composure impeccable as always. "Mr. Duke seems to have a new friend," she said, her smile faint but warmer than yesterday. Lila returned it nervously. "He's a charmer," she replied, patting Duke's head. The dog leaned against her leg, tail wagging in a slow, knowing rhythm. Eleanor sat at her usual table by the window, the one that caught the morning light just so. As Lila brought her latte, she hesitated. "Mrs. Whitmore, may I ask you something?" Eleanor looked up, the edge of her expression softening. "You may." Lila nodded toward the silver chain, glinting against Eleanor's black turtleneck. "That necklace. Where did you get it?" A pause, sharp as broken glass. Then Eleanor's voice dropped low, thoughtful. "It belonged to my husband, Richard. He died in the warehouse fire in 2008. The word struck like a spark. 2008. The same year her father disappeared in the Whitmore warehouse blaze, the fire that had burned for nearly 12 hours before collapsing the structure. The newspapers had called it the Inferno of Tremont Street. Lila's breath caught. "My father was there that night," she said quietly. "He was the fire captain who led the rescue." Eleanor's eyes widened, just for an instant, before she composed herself again. "Tom Dawson," she murmured, almost to herself. "I remember that name. The paper said he didn't make it out." Lila nodded, fighting the lump in her throat. "They never found him. Just his helmet, near the north wall." Eleanor's fingers brushed the pendant unconsciously. "Richard's body was found on the south side," she said slowly. "He was wearing this chain." Then she looked directly at Lila, her gaze sharp, almost haunted. "Do you believe he could have given your father one just like it?" Lila hesitated. "Maybe. They could have known each other. Firefighters worked closely with property owners back then." But her voice trembled. She didn't believe it was coincidence anymore. Eleanor exhaled deeply, her poise faltering. "My husband spoke of a man who saved him once, a firefighter who ran back inside when the second explosion hit. I never knew his name." She lowered her eyes. "Perhaps that man was your father." The silence between them thickened, broken only by Duke's soft breathing. The dog's gaze shifted between the two women, as if sensing a truth neither could yet voice. Eleanor's demeanor softened, her tone, once distant, turned almost maternal. Would you come to my house tomorrow? She asked gently. I still have some of Richard's things. Letters, photographs. Perhaps they hold something you're meant to see. Lila hesitated, fear and curiosity warring within her. But the thought of her father, of answers buried under ashes, burned too brightly to ignore. Yes, she said finally. I'll come. Outside, snow began to fall again, heavier this time. Duke nudged Lila's hand before following Eleanor out the door, leaving paw prints that melted quickly in the slush. Lila stood at the counter long after they'd gone, the hum of the espresso machine fading into silence. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, faint, familiar, and full of memory. For the first time in years, she felt it again. The fire inside her father had not died. It had only been waiting for her to find it. The night air in Boston felt sharper than usual, the kind that cut through coats and found the spaces between heartbeats. After her shift, Lila Dawson trudged up the narrow stairwell of her worn apartment building, the echoes of footsteps hollowing in the dim light. Her home was small, a single room with peeling wallpaper and the faint hum of a radiator that never quite worked. She dropped her coat over a chair and sat on the floor, pulling out a small tin box from beneath her bed. Inside were fragments of a life she had tried to hold on to. Her father's firefighter badge, a burnt corner of his last commendation letter, and a handful of old photographs curled at the edges. As she thumbed through them, one picture stopped her cold. Her father, Tom Dawson, tall, broad-shouldered, his jaw square and his smile disarmingly kind, stood beside a man in a crisp suit. The man's hair was already streaked with gray, though his face carried the confidence of wealth. Under the faint light, Lila's heart skipped. She'd seen that face before, in newspapers, on building plaques, and just yesterday, in the words that had left Eleanor Whitmore's lips. The man beside her father was Richard Whitmore. In the photograph, both men wore matching silver chains, identical pendants carved with the flame and letter emblem. Beneath it, in faded ink, someone had scribbled, "To loyalty and the fire that binds." Lila pressed her trembling hand to her mouth. Her father and Eleanor's husband hadn't just met in passing. They'd been friends. The next morning, snow blanketed the streets in silence. Lila's nerves tangled as she walked to Maple and Steam, the photograph tucked carefully inside her jacket. When Eleanor arrived, Duke bounded through the door as usual, his tail wagging with instinctive joy. The cafe's warmth contrasted the frost outside, but tension still crackled in the air between the two women. Lila approached Eleanor's table with the photo in hand. "I found something," she said softly, sliding it across. Eleanor adjusted her glasses, delicate, gold-framed, and looked down. The color drained from her face. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled as she lifted the photo closer. "My God," she whispered. "That's Richard. And Tom Dawson." Her eyes glistened. "I remember now. Richard used to tell me about a firefighter who pulled him out during a chemical blaze years ago. 2002, I think. They became close after that. He called him a brother." Lila listened, breath held, as Eleanor continued, her voice shaking under the weight of revelation. "Richard gave him that chain," she said. "He called it the flame of loyalty. He said anyone who wore it was family." Eleanor's composure cracked for the first time. Her lips quivered, eyes rimmed red. "Richard never told me Tom died in the warehouse fire. He just said, 'Someone stayed behind to save another man.' I didn't know that. Someone was your father." Lila's throat burned with emotion. "He was that man," she said, voice trembling. "He didn't run. He went back for your husband." The cafe fell silent. Even the usual chatter seemed to fade into the background. Eleanor sat still, the photo trembling in her hands, the weight of gratitude and guilt colliding in her chest. Duke rested his head on her knee, sensing her grief, while his other paw reached toward Lila, bridging a gap words couldn't. Finally, Eleanor looked up, her expression softer, almost maternal. "Lila, would you come to my home tomorrow evening?" she asked quietly. "There are things I need to show you. Richard's letters, his journals. Maybe they'll help us both understand what really happened." Lila hesitated only a moment, then nodded. "I'll come." As Eleanor rose to leave, Duke lingered, his amber eyes locking with Lila's. For a heartbeat, she felt it again, that inexplicable pull, as though this animal carried some unspoken piece of her past. When the door closed behind them, Lila pressed her father's chain to her chest and whispered, "Dad, I think I'm finally getting close." The next morning broke gray and solemn over Boston. Snow clung to the branches like ghosts unwilling to leave. Lila stood before the Whitmore estate, her breath forming clouds in the cold. The mansion loomed against the pale sky, a monument of grandeur now decayed. Cracked marble lions guarded the gate, their faces streaked by years of rain and regret. Eleanor Whitmore, wrapped in a heavy wool coat and fur-lined scarf, looked older than she had at the cafe. The harsh light revealed the fine lines beneath her eyes, the kind carved not by age, but by guilt. Her hands, though gloved, trembled slightly as she unlocked the iron gate. "Richard bought this house when our first building opened," she said softly. "He used to say its walls carried the warmth of fire. Ironic, isn't it?" Lila didn't answer. She followed quietly, Duke padding between them. The German shepherd moved with purpose, tail low, ears alert. His fur shimmered under the faint light, black fading into tan, dusted white at the muzzle. He was aging, but his movements still carried a soldier's discipline. Inside, the mansion was frozen in time. Dust layered the chandeliers like gray lace. Portraits lined the hallway, smiling faces trapped behind cracked glass. As they descended into the basement, the air grew colder. The smell of ash lingered, faint but unmistakable. Eleanor stopped before a rusted metal door. "This is where it started," she murmured. "The fire. The first explosion came from the east wing. The firefighters broke in through here." Lila's heart raced. Duke whined softly, sniffing the air, then pawed at a pile of debris near the far wall. Beneath the rubble lay a small iron box, its surface scarred but intact. Carved on its lid were the letters, and tea. Eleanor knelt, brushing the dust with trembling hands. "Richard and Tom," she whispered. "He kept this hidden." With effort, they pried the box open. Inside were relics of a friendship long turned to legend: a charred journal, a folded letter, and a cassette tape half melted by heat. Lila's breath hitched. The letter was written in familiar handwriting, her father's. "If anyone finds this, tell my daughter I went back, because no man should die alone. The fire isn't what took us. It's fear. Don't let her grow up afraid of it. Tell her the flame is still hers." Her vision blurred with tears. She could almost hear his voice again, calm and steady as it had been when she was small. Eleanor held the tape gently, her fingers trembling. She found an old recorder on a nearby shelf, wiped the dust away, and pressed play. The speaker crackled. Then came a voice, hoarse, exhausted, but unmistakably human. "This is Captain Tom Dawson. If anyone hears this, I didn't make it out. Richard's trapped. I'm going back. If I don't, tell my little girl her father's proud. Tell her she was my courage." The message ended with static, a low hum that filled the silence like a heartbeat fading away. Lila collapsed to her knees, the sound tearing through her. Eleanor crouched beside her, tears glistening in her eyes. "He didn't die because of Richard," she said quietly. "He died saving him. My husband lived his last years in guilt. He never told me why he survived. Now I know." For the first time, the widow's voice cracked fully. She reached up, unclasped her silver necklace, the twin to Lila's, and placed it into her trembling hands. "It belongs to you," she whispered. "You carry what they both stood for: courage that doesn't burn out." Lila looked at Duke, who rested his head against her knee. His amber eyes, wise and gentle, seemed to understand. The dog gave a low, comforting whine, then pressed closer, the living echo of all that had been lost and found. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow, like ashes returning to heaven. 3 months later, Boston thawed under the pale blush of early spring. The snow had begun to retreat, leaving behind glistening puddles that mirrored the city's awakening. At the corner of Harrison Avenue, a crowd had gathered before the newly built Firefighters Memorial Plaza. The air carried both solemnity and pride, mingling with the scent of polished bronze and fresh lilies. At the center stood Lila Dawson, now dressed in a navy coat that gave her a quiet strength. Her once wary eyes seemed brighter, anchored by purpose. The silver chain at her neck caught the sunlight, the same flame and letter emblem that had once symbolized loss now shimmered as a beacon of remembrance. Beside her, Eleanor Whitmore stood poised in a dark overcoat, her silver hair pinned neatly beneath a felt hat. The woman who had once lived behind marble gates now looked smaller, gentler, human. Age had not softened her beauty, but grief and redemption had lent her grace. Her gloved hand rested lightly on Duke's head, as if drawing courage from him. The German shepherd sat proudly between them, his fur gleaming gold and black under the morning light. Though older now, his eyes remained sharp, always watching Lila, as if guarding not her body, but her heart. Around his collar hung a small tag engraved with the words, "Faith, Family, Fire." A man stepped to the podium, Chief Brandon Ellis, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with salt and pepper hair and the weary dignity of one who'd seen too many flames. His uniform was crisp, his voice steady, but filled with reverence. "Today," he began, "we honor Captain Tom Dawson, a man whose courage reignited what duty truly means. He didn't wear a cape or seek fame. He wore a helmet and a promise to protect life, no matter the cost." The crowd bowed their heads. Among them were firefighters in uniform, families holding red carnations, and a few older men with burned scars that told their own stories. When Chief Ellis invited Lila to speak, her hands trembled as she approached the podium. She glanced at the bronze plaque before her, her father's name newly etched into eternity, and drew a breath. "My father never made it home," she said, voice quivering but resolute. "For years I thought that meant he was gone. But standing here, I see that the fire he carried didn't die in that warehouse. It lived on, in every person he saved, in every act of courage that followed." Her gaze shifted to Eleanor. "He and Richard Whitmore were brothers in fire. And today, through this memorial, through this foundation Mrs. Whitmore created, their friendship lives again." Applause rippled through the crowd, soft, genuine, the kind that comes from shared gratitude. Eleanor's eyes shimmered as she dabbed them with a handkerchief. Later, as the ceremony ended, Lila and Eleanor lingered by the statue. A bronze flame rose from the center, surrounded by plaques engraved with the names of fallen firefighters. "It's strange," Eleanor said, smiling faintly. "For the first time, I don't feel haunted by this place." "That's because we stopped running from the fire," Lila replied. "We learned to walk through it." Duke barked once, tail swishing, as if in approval. Lila knelt and scratched his neck, laughing softly. "You're part of this family now, you know that." The dog tilted his head, then pressed his nose into her palm. Loyal as ever. That evening, back at Maple and Steam, the cafe glowed in the amber dusk. Duke lay curled near the counter. Eleanor sipped tea by the window, and Lila polished the framed photograph of her father and Richard that now hung above the fireplace. Snow had melted from the city, but inside that little cafe, the warmth of gratitude burned steady, a quiet, eternal flame. In the quiet glow of that small Boston cafe, as the last snow melted into streams of light, it felt as though heaven itself had whispered, "Not every miracle arrives with thunder and angels. Sometimes God works through ordinary people, a grieving daughter, a remorseful widow, a loyal dog, to remind us that faith is not found in the fire's absence, but in the courage to walk through it." What burned that night so many years ago was not meant to destroy. It was meant to reveal. Because when the ashes settled, love remained. And from that love, new life began. A friendship reborn, a family rediscovered, and a flame of kindness that no storm could ever put out. So if you're watching this tonight, remember, maybe the miracle you've been waiting for is already here, hidden in forgiveness, in compassion, in the way you choose to keep going even when the world feels cold. Share this story if it touched your heart. Leave a comment to tell us who your flame is, the person who reminds you to stay brave. And don't forget to subscribe so we can continue spreading stories of faith, courage, and the quiet miracles that live among us every day. May God bless you and keep your flame burning through every season, through every storm.